Hey everybody, welcome to Terminus, the DMX of Extreme Metal podcast. I am the death metal guy, aka got blood on my dick cause I fucked a corpse.
And I am the black metal guy, aka, how charming.
You know that's a DMX line, right?
No, I don't. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's got blood on my hands, I got no remorse, I got blood on my dick cause I fucked a corpse.
Oh yeah.
real fucking slam death hip hop right there. Salute to DMX, gone before his time.
Hail DMX.
Alright, so, not a lot going on in the Terminus co-prosperity sphere right now, so we're gonna get right into our album rundown, and oh boy. So, here's the thing, guys. I understand what you're listening for. I understand if you're listening to Terminus Extreme Metal Podcast, you're an internet guy who's deeply invested in modern as well as old school varieties of black metal and the in-depth discussion that we have of that genre in general. So I'm here to fuck your whole day up. Just skip this episode because I am starting the first half with not one but two brutal death metal records. And as usual, we will do our best to encourage black metal people to listen to them because they are both very good. So first off for the night, I am very excited to present the debut record by Exterminated from the Philippines with their album The Genesis of Genocide on Comatose Music. Comatose, a label that I'm pretty sure we featured once or twice before, but just simply one of my favorites. Steve Green of Lust of Decay, he's the manager of that label. Just absolute stalwart label in the brutal death metal scene, always puts out great stuff by both old and new artists, and I think if there's... I think if you're a black metal guy listening to this and rolling your eyes at the brutal death metal thing, this is the one to listen to because this is where the real case will be made for brutal death as a whole, not just as an exception. So second off, on my half, we have a returning artist in the form of Onchocerciasis, Esophagogastroduodenoscopy with the rotted plinth of Sachiel. Hey! Yeah, you know, I've been listening to bands with names like that for so long. I know how to pronounce the medical terminology. So, we covered the debut EP by this band on, I think, episode 4 or something of Terminus in our very early days last year. And they finally come out with their first full-length record on Stillbirth Records. Those who were interested in the very kind of abstract reaches of metal will be very interested in this one because there's another argument to be made here about brutal death metal as sort of abstract art music, so hopefully people will be able to get through the slams to get to some of that.
Well, and that one has literal black metal influences on it, like a
that
lot.
is true. That is true.
Like much, and probably not quite what people are expecting. So yeah, okay. So and now here I come in with the carrot on the stick, which is if you can get through the first half of the show, and I did quite enjoy both these records. But if you can get through the first half of the show, then my God, we're gonna do three raw underground black metal short releases. So first up, listener submission by the dude from Lungtoucher. This is the upcoming Panzerwar Lungtoucher split. It is the Battle of Jorvik is the theme. I'm guessing Jorvik is going to be Norse for York. This has to do with, the theme is Vikings versus Saxons, Viking invasions of England. Obviously, they settled in Yorkshire. Which had the extremely metal name of the Danelaw. But yeah, so we got this split. We've got Turment Nocturnes, Sensa Misericordia, and that is out on tapes on Narbentage. Narbentage is one of those hard copy only labels. And there's a CDR in the old school style distributed through, I think, a very, very specific Spanish distro called Negra Neat.
Oh yeah, bring back CDR labels, absolutely.
Yeah, well, there you go. So, and what that is kind of well, yeah, you'll feel good, glorious sounding raw black metal. We'll get to it. Last up is Doppelaxt with their debut, Kill the Opposition. Independent on digital, but there's upcoming cassettes through Signal Rex, which is cool. Signal Rex has done a lot of Portuguese and Basque bands, I think, right? And Doppelaxt is associated with the Pennsylvania black metal scene, and this is stomping, punked out Temple of Full Moon type stuff. It is brawny heathen black metal, so stick around for that.
All right. First disappointment for all the black metal fans. Exterminated, the Genesis of Genocide. So a little bit of background, because I believe this is the first Filipino brutal death record we've featured on the show. And for those not versed in the scene, the Philippines has a pretty vibrant brutal death metal scene. It really started coming onto the global scene around 2007 when the band Down from the Wound released their first record, Agony Through Rituals of Self-Purification. A phenomenal brutal death metal record that really put the nation on the map for the greater brutal death scene. And it's really followed, kind of strength to strength from then, including bands like Human Mastication and Pus Vomit, as well as plenty of others that are a little bit more locally known in Southeast Asia. And in terms of describing the regional style, I would say that it's kind of similar to Colombian brutal death in that it's, got that very raw, kind of putrid quality, but there's a lot more influence from sort of early brutal death groove stuff, sort of dying fetus, suffocation, internal bleeding, that sort of thing, which I think may be attributable to Japan, where that's a very fundamental part of their brutal death sound.
So stuff that's kind of like proto-slam.
Yeah, very proto-slam. I mean, you could argue that Suffocation does the first ever slam riff in Leash of Inveracity, and then Internal Bleeding and their contemporaries bring in a lot of the kind of New York hardcore sound.
I was going to say, I think I get what you mean. So they're like brutal. They have this raw brutal death sound, but they're also drawing on this strain of brutal death that kind of verged on hardcore and later influenced slam.
Yeah, and that's just all part of the texture of the old NYDM scene, which was, which went in so many different directions. You can't say NYDM and have a single thing in mind. So now we have Exterminated with the Genesis of Genocide. I heard the first kind of promo track off this maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago off Comatose Music, and as soon as I heard it, I put it on our spreadsheet, like absolutely recovering this record. And I was, unsurprisingly, very impressed. I think this is probably the best brutal death record that we've covered this year. But you have very interesting things to say about it, so I want to throw it to you. What are your impressions of this record?
All right, well, black metal fans, if you like things that do things like black metal, then I have good news for you. This all sounds the same. It is, and I mean that as a compliment. I sort of, so I've been, over the course of this show, which is almost a year now, the death metal guy's been showing me more brutal death related stuff, and I think I've been, like, oh yeah, I can handle it, no prob. Yeah, I'm great at listening to metal. Sure, this brutal death stuff is cool. And then I get to this, and I'm like, this is the hate forest of brutal death metal. as in, this is as impenetrable to me as hate forest is to you. So like, when I first listened to this, I had a really hard time figuring out what made these songs different from each other. But I could immediately tell that meant it was good. It has this intense homogeneity of substance of its different elements. There's just like one element throughout the whole thing, and it's being morphed in different ways. In the same way as great bands like Hate Forest or Discharge or any of those other bands that I talk about constantly. I got this sense like, okay, this is actually hard for me to listen to. It's I tried to figure it out, right? So I ended up playing. I listened through this several times, just looping through the back half, trying to figure out what the hell was going on, it's just so purely brutal death metal, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think a thing that's allowed me to sort of vibe with some of the other stuff more, right, is that is these sort of, these kind of crazed high-speed trem riffs, and the stuff like induced or molecular fragmentation that has this kind of raw, kind of war metal sound, and just certain kinds of riffing that tap into different styles. This has one style of... This, I think, has two kinds of riffs, which we'll get into later. Similar with the guitar tone, right? So some of that other brutal death stuff I can get into because the tone is so, it can be so noisy and abrasive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here, and we'll get a lot of that with Onchocerciasis, right?
Yeah.
Here, the guitar tone is just it is just this kind of mudslide of low end, right? Just this sort of big, viscous sort of sound, just, mudslide crashing over a village. It's like the epitome of what you described like death metal as being sort of visceral substance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that in terms of, reaching way back to, ironically, the first time we covered Onchocerciasis, because we also covered Encenithrock on that episode, I believe, where I initially spoke about that idea of brutal death metal in particular as being artistically very different from the black metal that we like, and that it is just a sort of it's just mass, it's matter,
Mm-hmm.
The appeal is in the sort of philosophical weight of it, and it's interesting because I think that this record really has that weight to it without any of the sort of notable abstract elements of a lot of the brutal death that we've covered.
Yeah, it's like, this is like some of the best art music in that it's not, this is art precisely in the way it's not signaling to you that it's art.
Yeah, no, I think, and it's interesting because we were talking about this last night. It's, as I've been presenting brutal death to you on the show, it's interesting that the most abstract and harsh stuff that I thought would be the most challenging actually isn't, because you find the commonalities between that and really extreme war metal or very raw black metal pretty easily. Mm-hmm. But it's stuff like this that just occupies the sort of perfect aesthetic center of brutal death.
Yes.
That is more challenging. Yeah, which is very interesting to me.
It is, yes, it is not brutal death verging. Yeah, I can go either in brutal death verging on extreme war metal or brutal death, verging on hardcore or whatever, right? I can access all that. And this is just brutal death for dudes who like brutal death. And for something that sounds so foul, right, it has a commendable purity, right, to use Hate Forest's term.
Oh, absolutely. This is... I mean, I can understand the appeal to, or at least the understanding, in that it is rigorous music. It deliberately eschews any elements that are not naturally a part of itself. You know, it really does have an atmosphere of its own, which is...
That's true.
Yeah, which is in part that sort of mechanical rigidity, alongside the just... This is a really cruel, really angry record compared to a lot of the brutal death that we've covered. Despite its technical ability, there is an unsettling just viciousness, you know, a deliberateness to it, which I think makes it really distinct. I think the album art really conveys the whole thing.
Oh yeah, why don't you run through that for the listeners?
Okay, so I'm going to assume that this is depicting something from the Philippines in World War II, because it appears that it depicts a number of Japanese soldiers slaughtering what I assume are Philippine civilians. It is a little bit amateurishly done in the right way. You've got this horrible, like, sadistic gore scene in the front, but the distinctive part are the lines of people in the background. Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, waiting to be subjected to this. I think that there is probably some sort of historical theme going on here, or at the very least, the concept of the record is based around the atrocities committed to the Filipino people in World War II. But admittedly, my knowledge of that aspect of World War II is extremely limited, apart from the fact that it wasn't fucking great for the Philippines at the time. And I think it really conveys that through the records, just this intense viciousness, this contempt that it has for the listener. And, well, I mean, to present that to people, we should probably do some samples. And I think we've both sampled the same track on this one. It's one called Murderous Intent. And you chose kind of the first section of this. What made you choose this one?
Because, well, this was the first one. This is a few tracks in, right? This is track 3 or 4?
Yeah, track 4.
Track 4. Yeah, so this is the first one I could hear that I could really get my hooks in. When I listened through it the first time, I was like, oh, this is a fucking sick song. As soon as I went over to the sheet and saw you'd already put it down, I was like, "You motherfucker!" And then I was like, "Okay, you took the only song I could understand." No, so I just put the beginning on so that we got the whole song because it's sick. This listeners will hear. This song has more than a hint of the kind of NYDM hardcore vibe in it. Some extraordinarily brutal kind of slam beat downs and whatever, but it also is just, I mean, it's just a really, this is the closest thing to a catchy song on the record. This is a very, very, like, coherent, this sort of, the others are kind of like units in this process that continues through the whole album. This feels like a standalone song. This is like the single.
Yeah, I would say this is definitely the one that kind of stands on its own as almost accessible to people who aren't into this. So,
and I think there's like really exciting interplay between the different parts here. So let's just set it off, and should we just play the whole thing, or should we talk about the first? Well, we'll talk about the first bit, and then we'll start it up with yours. Okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's listen to kind of your first half. We'll break it down, and then we'll get into my points. All right. Oh man, every time I hear that guitar tone, I just smile. Because I know how repellent it is to so many people.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I've said it before on the show, but I feel like there's a specific image I always associate with that kind of, where they just sort of, it's the second riff, right? There's a little setup, and then the second riff, you could just hear them kind of gleefully lighting into this. And it's kind of that low end 16th note chug as the drummer just methodically bangs the snare on every single beat rigidly. And I always think of like the demon on the cover of the demon on the Pleasure to Kill album cover, just sort of with the axe and the skeletons, and they're all coming up the hill, and I just imagine him hitting them all on the head methodically with the axe in just like 16 times speed. I swear, once the show gets bigger, we got to get an animator to make that, because this is clearly a fantasy of mine.
You're very dedicated to this idea of the guy on Pleasure to Kill hitting 4 skeletons per second with his axe.
Yes. Yeah, that's 4 SPS.
That's the way we will measure BPM in the future, is skeletons per second.
Yeah, this has a lot of skeletons per second. Okay, so for the more intelligent commentary,
oh, go ahead. The intelligent commentary.
No.
That's all.
Oh no, that was you. That was,
that's me. Well, no. So, yeah. Well, it's interesting you talking about those just brutal palm muted 16th note riffs, because it's at least structurally kind of similar in a way to what you call like the grid written Sargeist riff.
It is
in black metal. But I think it approaches it from a different perspective, wherein in brutal death metal, the idea is the maximal number of notes in the space allotted. It's, these are, they always come over blast beats, and they are always these sort of indecipherable granite blocks of music for people who know how to parse it, And I think that riffing style in particular is one of the most challenging things to approach for someone who isn't that well versed in the genre, because it's unapproachable completely.
Yeah, I think the thing, yeah, so here they are. The reason that grid-written riffing can be a problem in black metal is simply because not everyone is Migla. They can use it as an excuse to write these sort of cookie-cutter riffs where it's just like rhythmically uniform things with fill-in-the-blanks on the notes. And then in music that should have melodic movement to it and sort of contour, it just becomes all interchangeable. Here, that is very much the inorganicity of it and the rigidity of it, and as you say, just to fill all the space. That's the other thing. The black metal bands that do that are almost never doing this kind of like this just wall of notes approach. It's and there's something almost, it's not arbitrary, and we can get into that more as this goes on, right? But there's something. The fact where in black metal if it sounds like the notes are arbitrary, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. Whereas here, the sense that like you could drop some of these phrases around and put them in other spots isn't really a problem at all. That's just like looking at one part of a wall and realizing that it could be over there in the other part of the wall.
I like that. Yeah, no, it's I think that listening to this music, this style of music, requires, well, I mean, I guess it's not that dramatic to say it requires a very different kind of listening from, say, listening to black metal.
Oh, wait, I figured out the other thing. It's also just rhythm, right? It's that a lot of the time the black metal bands that are doing that have nothing else rhythmically going on, whereas here there's a rhythmic game being played with every single 16th note and the drummer interacting with the palm mutes.
Oh yeah, the drum programming on this record is something I'm definitely going to get into, because it is just outstanding. And we're going to hear that in the second half of Murderous Intent here. So a couple things I want to draw attention to. There's an absolutely outstanding pinch harmonic focused breakdown here, very much like Infected Malignity or a band like that. And then also at the beginning of the sample, let's pay close attention to the drum programming, which may be some of the finest programmed drums I've ever heard in this style of music. It's so detailed and it's so uncompromising. When it comes to like kind of copy pasting beats, there's always an effort to make this not sound like a human because they're embracing the inorganic quality of it, but to keep it exciting and varied and interesting.
Given that I'm an idiot, are you sure it's a drum machine?
Yeah, this is a drum machine on this one.
Okay, for sure. You know I have no ear for that sort of thing, so I was just trying to verify.
It's definitely within the bounds of a human player, but yes, it's programmed on this one.
That makes sense. It is very, very uncompromising.
Yeah. All right, Murderous Intent. Let's do it. Love those kind of burpy Asian brutal death vocals. They've got a very unique tone to them.
Oh man, when the beatdown hit, he sort of went a little higher in tonality and just had that.
Yeah.
That was really, really sick.
Yeah, so obviously the standout there is that fucking pinch harmonic riff, which you said is, ironically, given what we were saying earlier, it's kind of like a creator riff, you know?
Yeah, well, it starts out with basic... Yeah, I mean, I swear there is a brutal death metal creator connection, because Defeated Sanity does this too. But like, yeah, that they started out with something that was basically just their own, like, hyper-rigid version of a thrash riff, just a classic, good one, and then they sort of bend it directly. It just seamlessly turns into that pinch harmonic riff, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's one of the few riffs on this record that's very recognizable and very readable immediately.
Yeah, that's a riff. And then the and everyone who hears it will be like, "Oh yeah, I like metal. That's a metal riff." And the end of the song has another one, because he starts playing more like, he stops the muting and he starts playing leads. And the first part of that riff is exactly in the sort of rigid 16th note procedure, but then he doubles the time on the rest of it. So he's playing like blur fast. It like squiggles up. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was...
Yeah.
Like, that, I did not notice that the first time through. That's, I guess, the kind of detail you notice on the second time through. But that is a riff. That is very distinct.
Yeah, no, I mean, I said in the notes, and I've said it on the show before, but when it comes to listening to this style of music, it really is all in the fine detailing. Which is one of the reasons I want to draw so much attention to the programming on this, because just, it's phenomenal. Like, just the sheer desire to create a cool moment at any given, like, a 3-second sample of this record. There's always something creative happening on the drums, like almost in excess of what a real drummer would do. A real drummer would be more restrained than these guys are in terms of programming. They're like, every good idea for a beat variation or a fill, we are dumping into every song, which, it creates another thread of the music to follow. You're basically listening to drum riffs in addition to the guitar riffs throughout the whole record.
The serpent column of brutal death metal.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. Yeah, it's not, it's obviously, it's beat driven. I mean, it's adhering to death metal convention, but the adornment that you hear on all those rhythms is really exceptional, and I think adds a lot to music that, at least from a production standpoint, can sound very flat and very muted.
Yeah, and it's using it's like you were saying, it's it's kind of using the drum machine as an instrument with its own range of possibilities. Yeah, not as a metronome.
So, what have you got next?
All right, let's see. Oh yeah, so this is I actually had to wait on the next sample because I was like, I can't tell these apart, and I was like, screw it, I'll figure it out later. But when I came back to it tonight, I remember the title, Chaotic Dimension of the Insane. And it turned out to be actually one of the ones that did strike me most on the first way through. Sample is gonna start off with a sort of classic shuffling slam. Not exactly my thing, but it's how this music works. And then you're gonna hear like one of those 16th runs. One of the more kind of like the default fast riff is just palm muted 16th run. Some of them are kind of low and groovy. And then some of the higher ones take on a more melodic, it becomes more like building melodies out of that. And I think the death metal guy and I both sampled parts that emphasize that from the back end of the record. But so you're going to hear this sort of more quote-unquote melodic riff start trying to take off. And it's trading with the chug. And it's kind of like classical development. It's kind of like A, B, A, B, like, A, B, A variation, B variation, A variation 2, B variation 2, then boom, up. So you're going to hear like a sick riff sort of pulling itself into existence.
All right,
in the chaotic dimension of the insane.
I like how he always hangs on to the gurgle for a couple seconds at the end of these tracks.
You can almost go out whistling it. You know?
Yeah, well, I was thinking while I was hearing that riff, it's like, listening closely, it's like, oh, there's a real melodic dimension to that. And I'm starting to realize, oh, maybe one of the things that people struggle with in this music is just the timbre of the guitars.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it really isn't, even on a melodic riff like that, it doesn't sound melodic in the way that other metal does.
No, I think that's a distinctive feature of this genre, is that, like, the trem riff is not the unit. They're using this sort of... The things that confuse people is that that was a trem riff. That was, like, that was the equivalent of, like...
Yeah.
The big, flourishing, Hessian firm death metal trem riff, right? Mm-hmm. And it comes as this just barrage of palm mutes. And on the other hand, like, so if you're looking for trem riffs, you're confused. And then if you're looking for big chuggo parts, well, you hear all of this chug that isn't really adding up to beatdown force. It's just kind of, right? You don't know what to make of it. And Brutal Death really has its own territory. It's, I guess the way to think of to make it more accessible, it's just like really extreme staccato.
Yeah. It's the power of it really, I mean, it's almost like music in binary in a way. You know, it's because especially when you have that very flat production in a good way, like this record does, where between every one of those very fast 16th note runs, it's like the cymbal and the guitar note, you know, like the noise gate is so high it gets choked off. You've got that negative space between every note, no matter how fast it's going. And it creates this very disorienting, very claustrophobic effect, which it's viscerally unpleasant to listen to. I think that might be one of the issues with this music, is just like, no, I mean, even as someone who's really seasoned in this style of music, it's like, this record is half an hour long and it is an ordeal. You know, it's tough to get through, but again, in a good way.
Yeah, it was certainly, when I went back to it today, it was certainly more legible.
Yeah, no, I think that the taxing quality of it is part of the appeal. You know, it's an acquired taste, but it's a taste. And, talking to more black metal people, especially like guys on our Discord, you know, I was joking with the guys on our Discord that, we were gonna, ruin everyone's day by doing a Brutal Death episode, for a couple of the albums. And they were like, few people came up and was like, no, I love listening to you guys talk about the Brutal Death stuff. So maybe there's guys out there that are starting to listen to this a little bit more.
Well, I also think that if you're really into music, sometimes it's most enjoyable to hear things that are, people talk about things that are very far outside your wheelhouse, because then the only way to connect to them is by thinking really hard about how it works, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to stuff that's just not quite your thing, where you can be like, this isn't good, or I don't like it, or I am indifferent to this. Right? Yeah.
I think that music this rigorous has a creative dimension to it beyond itself, where it's kind of about talking it out and about, even just discussing why is it this way? Why has the genre developed in this manner? So, but speaking of that, all right, now it's time to go onto hard mode. I think this is the most hard mode Brutal Death sample I've ever put onto the show. So this is off the second to last track called Abyss of the Dead. And I'll tell you right now, this will be completely fucking illegible to anyone who's not into Brutal Death Metal. But I want to pose a challenge, not to you, but to the listeners out there. For the next minute 40, really pay attention to this. I know a lot of you guys are listening with one earbud in at work, but tell your boss to fuck off for, a little under 2 minutes and just really listen to this and really try to pick apart the notation going on here. Because I think you'll hear there's a really fascinating melodic idea at work, a wonderfully different sort of harmonic vocabulary than you're used to in extreme metal, and, of course, a rhythmic dimension that is almost unparalleled. So let's listen to the back half of this track. As far as samples we've played on the show, that might be just one of my favorites. It's perfect. It is totally uncompromising. It is a perfect example of a sort of genre at its height without incorporating any novelty or excessive abstraction. It is just... That is brutal death metal. That is why I listen to this music, is for passages like this one.
That had real musical phrases in it that, like, did things that I don't have the technical vocabulary to describe, right? It had, like, turnarounds and resolutions, and then it started off again, and it was doing things that much more highbrow forms of music do. Yeah.
Because you seized on it right there, there's a motif that appears in about 3 different places, which is that dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. And that appears in a few different harmonic arrangements. So we've got that sort of microphrasal restructuring thing that we heard on, like, Induced and Molecular Fragmentation, specifically from the guitarist between those two. We've also got this, just like the melodic dimension of what you're hearing is actually like a lot of, kind of intense, more dissonant classical music. We always go back to the Rite of Spring and a lot of Eastern European modernist classical music.
Shostakovich,
yeah, absolutely. And these wonderful broken rhythms that, you can imagine a way to play these melodies that would fit in like an orthodox black metal band almost, but the rhythmic rigor of it makes that impossible. And it also transforms the melodic quality of it, Like, these riffs played as just streams of tremolo picking would have a very different kind of weight to them than they do here.
Yeah, really what I think what we're figuring out here is, like, there's a whole set of timbres in classical music that are not used in the black metal interpretation of classical music. like specifically like staccato. Like if you think about like humming any of those lines, like you can hear in symphonies or whatever, you'll hear all sorts of things that sound almost that nonsensical, if not that nonsensical, right? You'll hear like these really rapid runs, and in orchestras and stuff, they can do that staccato, right? They're just incredibly proficient musicians. You'll hear them just crisping off every note, right? And obviously here that's happening in a more sort of bludgeoning kind of chugga way, and that makes it hard to pick up on. But if you changed the sound quality a little bit, I think it'd be easier to hear that. It just sounds like these for music that's so sort of muddy, it moves a lot like these very nimble parts of classical music.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes without saying, and I think you would agree that were we to reduce the muddiness of it, we'd be losing something in it.
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely. That's part of the conceit.
Yeah, you know? That's part of the aesthetic universe of this stuff. And
playing a version of it that sounded more like staccato strings might be a task for, a Hessian firm dark metal Black Death band, right?
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, there's melodic ideas on here that I could imagine a band like Mephitis using.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just the whole articulation of them and the sort of sonic aesthetic of it is so alien that it just wouldn't come across the same way. And I mean, I'm repeating myself constantly when I say this, but I mean, shit, people who have been listening to this, if Defeated Sanity didn't convince you that there was a purpose and an order to this music and a real reason to listen to it, maybe this will. Because I gotta say, I really feel a deep affection for this record. Just in that it stands out without doing anything alien to the style. It's resolutely brutal death metal. It's very easy for us to pick and choose and find a record within the brutal death scene that stands out due to some sort of novelty or some sort of abstraction that makes it more comparable to something else. But this is brutal death metal. This is a record that does not apologize for its style, which has no interest in accessing another audience, and demands your attention in a way that very few records today do.
How's it going? Connor here from Oncology, and you're listening to Terminus.
Alright, next up, so we have Onchocerciasis, Esophagogastroduodenoscopy with The Rotted Plinth of Sachiel on Stillbirth Records. And, we kind of talked about it a little bit on the last segment with Exterminated, but even more so now. I mean, if there is a record to position brutal death metal as abstract art music, this is basically it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you said it about the last one. I think if this can't sell people on the potential for seriousness within brutal death metal, I don't know what can. And it also does that without compromising on any of the brutal death metalness of it, which is very important. This is not it's not like the other brutal death metals kind of record. Right?
And there's been so many of those records over the years, and honestly, all of them were good records.
Black metal fans should be able to relate to that problem too, right? You get all these, like, that's like what everyone's, for a long time, I mean, it still happens, but for, 15 years, every like establishment music critic writing about black metal starts with like, it's not like that sort of boring stuff about like frosty forests with constant blast beats and mean sounding chords. It's,
I mean, I still like all those things.
Exactly, right. Don't worry, it's not just black metal.
It's also emo or post-punk or shoegaze or something.
Exactly. So, like, it's good to hear, as there is a lot of good black metal that pushes the genre forward without sort of making superficial gestures. It's good to hear brutal death like that.
Yeah. So, for those who didn't hear when we originally covered this band, OE, as we will continue to refer to them. So we covered their first EP last year, very early on the show, which was much more of a sort of slam record as we would understand it. It was called Adoration of Decaying Innocence. But even within the sort of more conventional slam nature, there was a sort of weird abstraction to it. There was a sense of sort of floating negative space to it, which I thought was very interesting. And it turns out that this is before we were, adequately promoting this, and the vocalist of this band got in touch with us a couple months ago, very appreciatively, about our review, and we had a little bit of contact with them, and some of the things they said about the upcoming record kind of poised us to want to cover it. I think you were in touch with the guitarist, like the instrumentalist here, right?
Yeah, I think so. Whoever was doing the Instagram account, he's great dude, very funny. He said something about like, I probably said something to the effect of, I feel like, I'm not a brutal death dude, but I feel like I can appreciate it. And he's like, and he was like, oh, well, our next one is going to be like that, but with like, I don't know what specifically he said. Maybe he said ulcerate style stuff. Maybe he said something else, but just like, it's going to be brutal death metal with these sorts of dissonant Black Death type ideas in it. And I was just like, oh, wow, that sounds like a possibility that we have been noticing starting to develop sort of in the margins of things all year, right?
Yeah, I think that this is a record that really seizes on a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about in regards to brutal death. Most importantly, the reincorporation of certain ideas from bands like Ulcerate. I think that goes back to I think we first noticed it and really acknowledged it on the Encephalic record that we covered last year. A fascinating Spanish brutal death record with very long, involved riffs and interesting textural ideas, very much in the vein of modern Ulcerate. And this band here, OE,
There was also a lot of it on Anal Stab Wound, right? Some of the really dramatic parts of Anal Stab Wound have that quality.
Yeah, and speaking to him in the interview that's going to be coming out soon, it seems that for him it links to the band Disentomb, and I think I've mentioned this a couple episodes ago. So Disentomb kind of takes the abstract textural ideas from Ulcerate and recombines them into brutal death metal. Ulcerate probably got a lot of their ideas from Deathspell Omega, so Deathspell Omega and Gorguts, obviously. These very abstract, kind of dissonant ideas. So there you go. Now you've got your link to black metal for anyone that needs an in here. And I think that it's very clear on this record that these guys are listening to a lot of, especially orthodox black metal and the more technical sides of the genre, but combining it in a way where there's not just like black metal passages. It's very integrated into the whole.
Yeah, well, you said, so you're you kind of gestured to this later. I feel like you're getting into some stuff you gestured into later in our notes. And just to continue that, something you point out here that I think is absolutely right, is that the black metal ideas here are coming directly from the source. And at times it seems even closer to the source than, say, DSO type skronk riffing, right? These sound like a lot of the DSO dissonant riffs sound like French black metal. Just really just bizarre, whacked, evil French hardcore black metal, right? And this sounds like that, or like some of the more quote-unquote normal-sounding Orthodox bands of that time, which you also pointed out. And just, yeah, there's a very authentic... Well, I'll get into it with my sample, but there's a very authentic black metal sound to some of the black metal riffs on here, and it works really well.
Yeah. So, but to make it clear, this is a brutal death record. But I would say one of the things that it's closest to is something we covered just recently on the show, which is the latest record by Humanity's Last Breath. Which, if you haven't heard that episode, Humanity's Last Breath is playing a sort of hyper-modernist, technical down-tempo hardcore.
Yeah.
Which incorporates a lot of gent elements, incorporates sort of abstract slam in a way, and is just sort of the height of greater breakdown music, so to speak. And these guys are interpreting a lot of those same ideas themselves, but in kind of a different way. So I want to play a sample off the opening track, which is the title track, The Rotted Plinth of Sachiel. And I really want to draw attention to the negative space in this. This is a sort of intro breakdown track in the old school tough guy hardcore style. But this series of breakdowns, this sort of lattice work of breakdowns, has a lot more to do with stuff like Cephalotripsy and some other bands that I'll mention. So let's check this one out. So, I mean, we have to talk about the vocal performance.
Oh, yeah.
Which is just as... It's really not very much like a slam vocal performance as we understand it, because a slam vocal performance... A slam vocalist is sort of the MC of the music. In the traditional dance hall sense, he's there to get the party started for you. You know, he's the rhythmic thread that you headbang to. Here, it's not that. Like the vocal performance on this is purely textural. It is just a horrible layer of slurring noise over everything, you know?
But also kind of rhythmically punctuated. I don't know, it's really catchy. Well, you heard me as we were listening. I was just making weird sounds along with it.
Yeah, I heard that. I was wondering what was going on.
Yeah, it's brutal death gang vocals. I
just really want to draw it to... Okay, so, you know, this is, to a lot of people, this is probably what people imagine when they think of the word slam, when they haven't really heard a lot of it, you know?
Yeah, and this is one of those wonderful things that's going to sound as brutal and abrasive to normal people in 2021 as any music with screaming did in 2005, right?
Oh yeah, it's just fucking... It's horrible sounding, very deliberately slow. Oh, go ahead.
Could we just for people who are slam virgins or whatever, right? A convention of the genre that the death metal guys introduced me to is sort of dubstep drops where they hit sub bass on one note, right? And so you heard that. If you thought your speakers were broken earlier in that sample, I swear I was listening to this very loud. I swear I thought it had just blown out the low end on my speakers. I turned the bass down for the rest of the record because I thought it was like just like the unholy clip of clips.
That it is so.
But it actually
sounds.
I'm listening on headphones. I'm listening on headphones now, and it actually just sounds like that. So it's just like normally those things sound like a whoop, like a dubstep thing, and here it just sounds like, I don't know, like a shotgun.
Oh yeah, it is. It's so clipped out. It's so fucking blown out that it almost has like a click to it. You know, it's like it's clipping so harshly. Yeah. You hear like the click of it peaking the signal, and which is interesting. Which means that it has the effect of a bass drop, but the sonic quality of something that we haven't really heard before. It's very different. It's purely electronic.
Yeah, that was really cool. We've also got to talk about the snare.
Oh yeah, the snare being awesome and trash canny, you know.
I mean, that might be the most brutal snare in terms of the sonic quality of this sort of music. Like, let's say not war metal or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But like, that's got to be the most brutal death snare I've ever heard. It, like, we say trash can normally. That sounds like an anvil.
Oh yeah, it's the ping on it is so high frequency and so attacking. It's so very different.
But it's not just high pingy, right? It's got a richness of tone, which makes me think anvil. It's like a real just like dang, dang, dang.
Oh yeah, no, I get that. No, it's definitely, this kind of music is, you have to have a real love for the individual tones on it. You know, it's I think we've talked about this a little bit previously on the show, the idea that sculpting tones and the art of sound, so to speak, is something kind of underappreciated in metal. And I think these guys think about that more. Like, how should these individual things sound, not just in a sort of conventional metal production way, but in the abstract of, like, we're sculpting these shapes out of nothing. You know, how should they be built?
Yeah, well, in black metal now too, and death metal, I think people are realizing there's a whole bunch of a whole bunch of idea space that hasn't been used, right? Like, you have all this freedom you didn't realize you had because you've been locked into compositional patterns from the early 90s.
Oh yeah, definitely. So before we go on to another sample, I want to show off another band that I think is probably
Wait, real quick before you do that.
Yep.
real quick before you do that, can I say one thing, because I have to do it while I keep it in my head.
Oh, sure. Go
There's a musical quotation on this. There's the breakdown towards the end. That is, I swear to, I swear to Thor, I've heard that before. It's like, and if it's me who remembers it, that means it's probably not Slam or Brutal Death. It means it's probably Beatdown. But like, I swear I know that riff. It's gotta be a quotation. I would love the band to tell us. If they just came up with that on their own, then cool. But I really want to try to figure out what that is. Anyway, I was
listening for it too, and it sounds very similar to some No Zodiac stuff, but I want to go a little more esoteric and go for something like Body Bag. Like, I could see these guys listen to a band like Body Bag, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know either of those, and I literally know that. I mean, you've played me No Zodiac before, but I literally know that riff. I think it might be I'm wondering, like, a slam approaching beatdown band I listen to is Vamachara from California, but I don't think it's them. It might be something more classic. I don't know. I will figure this out if
we're definitely gonna have to figure it out.
On the case.
So one thing I want to bring up, sort of connected to this idea of these like slams with huge negative space. So obviously cephalotripsy is a big touchstone for this music. For those who aren't familiar, cephalotripsy is a slam death band who had the brilliant and inherent idea to say, hey, what if we just did a slam death record that was only slams? And there weren't any of the tremolo riffs or the kind of like fast chug riffs you associate with death metal. It's just slams upon slams and just this technical lattice work of slams that evolves through each of these tracks. And they made one of the greatest brutal death albums of all time in a uterovaginal insertion of Extirpated Anomalies. But in addition to them, there's a band that I've talked about on the show a couple times who I wanted to bring up here because I think they're probably important to these guys in OE, and that's a band called Artery Eruption, who kind of do what cephalotripsy did, but they can only kind of play their instruments. And as a result of their kind of inability to play their instruments, they ended up creating fascinating abstract art music that is sort of the precursor to something like Astral Tomb. And I think if you listen to this, you'll be like, okay, I can see where this is coming from. But a lot of people don't pay attention to this band compared to others because thematically they're kind of yucky. So this is a song, just a quick sample of a track called Swarmed by Mosquitoes Placing Larvae into Your Cranium to Slowly Develop into Maggots Feasting on Facial Tissues. And it is off a record called Driving My Fist Through Her Chest. So, that's the reason why nobody's heard of them before. So
that's some real Dragon Ball Z shit.
Yeah, and the artwork is kind of DBZ also. So, check this out. Tell me what you think.
The uncensored DBZ uncensored. Okay.
she's sick.
Yeah, so artery eruption is the total rejection of all conceits of music and how it's supposed to be made.
It's kind of like the Marduk or Maniac Butcher of slam in terms of just sounding like what people... In terms of sounding like what people say it sounds like when they're making fun of it.
Yeah, it really is.
Like, I swear the vocalist was literally saying brie, brie, brie.
It's very possible.
But yeah, man, that I hear what you mean about Astral Tomb, and, you know, like, because at the beginning, right, it was the way this band had that kind of, like, this band has this kind of, like, hopping from one foot to another nonsense riff at the beginning of it. This sort of, like, weirdly rhythmic passage. And it's different from the Astral Tomb, but Astral Tomb is their own version of that. And then the slowdown is just, like I admit I found the first part of this song kind of funny, but the slowdown is just, like, flattening.
Oh yeah, because it has nothing to do with death metal anymore. It's totally abstracted beyond it.
It's just sound, isn't it? It's just the drums, like the bass drums, just go into and you just get.
Oh yeah, and if you actually counted out the there isn't really a time signature. It's basically in free time. It's just kind of abstract noise sculpted out of slam death parts, which is obviously, as you know me, the theoretical pinnacle of music. I don't need anything else when I've found that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So how would you relate this back to the OE?
Really, specifically in that the massive negative space in these breakdowns and the sort of distorted sense of timing. You'll hear kind of an Astral Tomb thing on that sample we just listened to off the title track, where you think that it's off time, but it's off time in exactly the same way every time, which means that it is a deliberate, written sort of thing. I think that, and also just like the essence of the timbre of it, you know, the fact that it sort of goes beyond conventional ideas of melody or dissonance, and the guitar just becomes an instrument of pure texture and timbre. You know, it's not really about riffing anymore at a certain point.
For sure. In some ways, that's kind of like the... this is kind of like the Pokemon devolution of the Hellhammer slowdown.
I can see that.
Yeah, Astral Tomb sounds both like this and like Hellhammer, so there's your link. But
yeah, it does.
But yeah, all right. So let's go to mine.
Sure.
All right. So this track, in terms of a very authentic connection to black metal, this track references one of TDMG's favorite albums, which Kevin from Cromlech today insisted sucks.
Well, Kevin, I apologize that you're wrong, but we'll move on from your your incorrect assessment.
So this song is called Bloodroot and Blazing Sun, which is a sick title and appears to be a tribute to A Blood Sword and a Colder Sun off of Grand Declaration of War by Mayhem.
Oh, I can see that.
And we've got and I think when we go to the sample, you'll hear why. So this has you're going to hear like some like cascading, you know, kind of eerie arpeggios, and that might remind you of Orthodox that might remind you of, like, you know, Ulcerate or whatever, but they're way simpler and they repeat way more and they sound more like early Orthodox black metal, or the source for that, which is Mayhem. So you're just going to get some really eerie, powerful black metal riffing over a base of chaotic slam, and then the slams keep slamming.
All right. Yeah, I can definitely hear the Grand Declaration of War there.
Right, because it's like Grand Declaration was kind of like the source for so much of that guitar style, as we point out on our bonus episode, where the death metal guy guides me through Grand Declaration of War. But yeah, you can hear how, right, that doesn't work. That's not like the fancy disso black stuff. That's a simple, powerful, looping black metal riff that just has sort of kind of modern tones and kind of dissonant harmonies, right?
Yeah, and I think for these guys, it's probably coming from Ulcerate pretty directly, at least in that instance, because I believe that that specific arpeggio shape is used somewhere on Everything is Fire.
All right, yeah, no, I can definitely hear how they're drawing that technique from Ulcerate, but the thing that struck, especially that kind of downward picking thing, the sort of cascading downstrokes, you were calling them, but but at the same time, I feel like Ulcerate's version of that is way fancier, whereas this just has like, this is just like distilled down to the essence in a way that strikes me as very specifically black metal.
Yeah, it's not really. I almost wonder if they could just play it like as a chord instead of like an arpeggiated figure, and you'd have kind of the same effect. It's more of a sound object than a melodic idea.
Yeah, well, it also sounds very aggressive.
Yeah, it's got the aggression that Ulcerate doesn't really have.
Exactly.
They jettisoned that for just cool abstract death metal-ish art music. And don't get me wrong, Ulcerate's very cool, but clearly they're going for something very different.
Yeah, that riff kind of pulses forward. It wants to get you. But yeah, and then, of course, in the sample, it just keeps going apeshit like that.
Definitely. Yeah, it's like, and that's one of the things that makes it special, is that I like that this music is so abstract and arty, but also so kind of primitive at the same time. You know? Which reflects back on a lot of my favorite black metal, you know, stuff like Vaughn or Profanatica or Demoncy, where a lot of the artiness comes out of how resolutely primitive and deliberately simplified it is. And I think there's something similar going on here.
Oh yeah, I mean, this attains the glory of actually sounding like pots and pans falling down the stairs.
That would be the ultimate ideal of this kind of music.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to do a sample off, this is a track called The Rose of Jericho. And so you're going to hear, this is going to be another sample that's more on the black metal side, at least in terms of technique. And I'm going to play this, and then just kind of the thesis statement, or, the research question of this is, why don't war metal people listen to this? Because this is, in every pertinent way, something like Nove Militia. It's similar to that to me. So let's listen to the first half of this one and figure out why cool guys in leather jackets aren't listening to this band. Yeah, that's a cool riff.
Yeah, that, in case you missed it, that was the riff.
So why wouldn't war metal people listen to this? Because, I mean, again, it's like, this hits me in the same way that, like, that Nove Militia record did. It's kind of disorienting. It's not really about the riffs. There's certain phrases within the riffs that kind of pop out at you and form a melodic thread, but it's mostly about just, like, energy and aggression. I mean, yeah, you've got kind of the 16th note brutal death runs, like we were talking about with Exterminated, but ultimately this feels more like that weirdo kind of orthodox war stuff that we've been seeing a lot of lately, more than brutal death, at least on a sample like this.
Yeah, well, this certainly has some of the most rhythmically straight ahead drumming on the record, right? It's just like yeah. And on this record, I smile every time I hear the snare, so I smile the whole time. But like, it's yeah, it hammers in the way that stuff does. I mean, I think the reason they're not listening to it is because it has kind of crazed neon anime art with squiggly brutal death logos, and it's about this is their more high concept album about Evangelion, but the previous ones have all been about mutilated waifus.
That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you were asking a rhetorical question. I mean, we know it's subcultural difference, right?
Yeah.
To strictly speaking, I don't know if, like, war metal people are listening to Novi Militia, but they probably should be, right? And I think you're referring also to, like, these sort of cool, cavernous Black Death leather jacket dudes who would listen to stuff like that, right? And it's like, this is easily artier than Nova Militia, right? Easily.
Yeah.
it's easily artier than almost all sort of cavernous Black Death stuff. Yeah, I agree. I mean, hopefully we can help encourage some more of this cross-listening. But, like, if you're interested in the Extremity arms race, I mean, you gotta keep up with this. This is, like, Conqueror levels of insanity, but with more definite melodic ideas.
Yeah, basically.
And more rhythms. You can, like, dance to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have anything more about that one?
No, let's wrap it up with your sample, man.
All right. Well, also, the song titles, in terms of appealing to war metal people, that one was called The Rose of Jericho. That could be on an Axis of Advance record, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Sort of like apocalyptic, biblical kind of thing, Okay, so this one also has a great title. Alluvial Maelstrom of Frenzied Self-Mutilation. All I wrote in the notes was "this guy" in all caps. I don't know what that means, so let's just listen to it.
I imagine in my once those big like fucking sweeps hit, I imagined in my brain a smug Pepe from 4chan with the caption, "I apologize that your brain doesn't work fast enough to pick up on the melodies."
Yeah.
Maybe that's the path forward for Brutal Death, is just being belligerent about, "I apologize that this music is too smart and sophisticated for you."
Dude, I mean, yeah, that part is, in terms of like musician-y stuff that happens on this record, that moment with the sweeps is one of the most sort of glorious, right? That's it's not wank. That's extremely high intensity and enjoyable. And what I felt like there, I mean, obviously my knowledge of the style is limited, but I felt like there this is a duo, but they start to hit that Defeated Sanity level of interactivity in the playing, of dynamism, where you get the quality of like trading lines. You get the sweep up and then it dives back into the chug, and then you get the and you get that sense of the different parts ricocheting off each other, which is a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, we talked about this, I think, when we covered the last Defeated Sanity record, where, it's like, small brain, tech stuff is awesome, medium brain, tech stuff is just wank, I'm more interested in, like, primitive, essential music, and then big brain, tech stuff is awesome,
Yeah, tech stuff wielded in the right hands, it's just more possibilities.
Exactly.
But yeah, that was really cool. What was I gonna say? I had a thought, but my brain is still reeling. I mean, oh yeah, this is really, if the last one, right? If the last one was very, like, sort of remorselessly cruel music, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the last one, I mean Exterminated, the last brutal death record we reviewed, and sort of like unfun until you break through the other side and it becomes fun. This music is joyous. You can hear it in the playing. I mean, not at all joyous in a sort of like, a lot of brutal death often has this kind of like playful quality, and it can make it a little bit goofy, and it can make it a little eclectic, and sort of like, wow, look what we can do, haha bros, wasn't that brutal, like haha fucking gore, right? This is not joyous, this is not like fun like that. It's joyous in the sense of like Reign of Terror, in the way that like hearing Darkthrone play on Under a Funeral Moon is joyous, right?
It's ecstatic about the process of creation.
Or destruction. Yes.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
All right, we are back. Black metal guys, you can come back. It's safe now. After the dulcet tones of cephalotripsy, a band that I always like when people talk about it in real life because it's pronounced like it sounds, but no one knows where the emphasis falls on which syllable. I've heard cephalotripsy, I've heard cephalotripsy, I've heard cephalotripsy, I've heard cephalotripsy.
What about cephalotripsy?
That's basically how I do
like
it.
the rap version. No, you say cephalotripsy.
Yeah. Cephalotrippy. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But now we are in the black metal half of the episode for all of our fans, and what do we have to start us off, black metal guy?
Well, yeah, so, we've started trying to cover more shorter releases, and this was going to be our Splits Day, but it was also a big day for Splits and Short Releases Day, but it was also a big day for Brutal Death. So, we're going just total Terminus, only Brutal Death and raw pagan black metal, exclusively. The only things we listen to. And the next split, or the next thing up, is a split by Lungtoucher and Panzerwar. These are both bands that have fairly significant followings in the sort of internet tape-based black metal world that is on Instagram. And Lungtoucher hit me up and he said he enjoyed an episode of the show and he wanted to hear what we thought of this new record.
They're a duo, right?
Oh, yeah. No, see, why do I always assume everything's a one-man project? It is, in fact, a duo. So, yes. So, one of the dudes from Lungtoucher hit me up. And it's an interesting concept for a split. So, Lungtoucher are from the UK, right? And Panzerwar is a Norwegian guy now based somewhere in North America, I think in Canada. And so they've taken on different teams in a concept album about the Viking invasions of England, 7 and 800s, right? So the conflict between the Norse and the Saxons centered on the Battle of Jorvik, which again Jorvik was first captured. Oh, I mean, I'm on the Bandcamp, so I might as well read it for you. I was thinking that Jorvik had to be the Old Norse for York, or Yorkshire. But here's the background. Jorvik had been founded as the Roman legionary fortress of Eboracum and was revived as the Anglo-Saxon trading port of Jorvik. Jorvik was first captured in 866 by Ivar the Boneless, leading a large army of Scandinavian warriors called the Great Heathen Army. Okay, so this is an event that's been in. It's in the Vikings show. It's also in, I think there's versions of it in The Last Kingdom. They landed in East Anglia, made their way north. The historical invasion of Northumbria in 866, so Northumbria being what is now Yorkshire, roughly, occurred in northeastern England, occurred in retaliation for Ragnar's execution. According to Ragnar's son Athator, King Aela captured the legendary Viking leader, Ragnar Lothbrok, and put him to death in a pit of snakes. Yeah, this is the snake. Yeah, so, okay, you all know all this.
I mean, I don't.
But yeah, so this is...
but go off, King.
No, this is pretty, this is sort of classic Viking lore that has been... It's been featured in some recent, some recent shows. God, is there anything interesting about, interesting... Snatch of lore is that the Saxon king Aela throws Ragnar Lothbrok to his death in a snake pit. Throwing to one's death in a snake pit is a common Norse mythological motif, or like Germanic mythological motif. Like in that's what
I love how specific it is.
Yeah, well, it has to. That's what happens at the end of the Volsunga saga. The Nibelung hero Hogni, the Nibelung hero Gunnar gets. Yeah, sorry, not Hogni. Gunnar gets thrown in a snake pit, and what he does is he as he waits for the snakes to bite him to death, he plays the harp and sings, glorious songs. And this legend is basically repeated in the way that myths sort of loop and reiterate, and things get repeated, but differently each time.
Mm-hmm.
You get that same myth repeated about Ragnar Lothbrok, who's, also descended from people who featured in that saga, supposedly. So he's one of these, sort of crypto historical figures. Some people think he was completely made up. I think that's horse shit, but clearly there's been a lot of mythological accumulation around him.
Mm-hmm.
A living man who attains godhead, right? Kind of like Alexander the Great or something. So, anyway, that's the background for this. There's a lot of lore, real IRL lore that you can check out if you want to. And even the show Vikings hadn't totally gone to shit by the time they covered this, so that scene is still pretty cool. So basically we've got the Norse versus Saxons split, and also with interludes by the British Dungeon Synth project, Maidenhair of England, which I thought were pretty good. We've been trying to become a little more receptive to Dungeon Synth, and I liked the kind of melodic bell tones on the beginning of the record.
Yeah, no, I think there is a real effort on both sides of these splits to kind of mirror each other. You can tell, the last Panzerwar song, or the second to last, is kind of mirroring the last Lungtoucher song in the way it's structured. And I think this is a much more of a real collaboration than most splits are. It's not just a collection of songs dumped together.
Yeah, they actually wrote songs for this split, very clearly. It wasn't just hey man, you got some leftover tracks? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's very cohesive, and each of them kind of moves towards the other sound in some way. So, we've covered Panzerwar before, in the past fall, right? And the default Panzerwar sound is, we described it as sort of back to the very roots, demo and EP era Norwegian black metal, pre-94, maybe even pre-93, plus strong infusion of hardcore punk song structures, right?
Yeah.
And drumming ideas, and very raw. This version of Panzerwar is a little different. We'll get to that, but I think in some ways it's really Lungtoucher that is the core of the sound, because Panzerwar is kind of bending his sound towards Lungtoucher. So
yeah, I'd agree.
I feel like his sound is kind of in your wheelhouse in some ways more than mine. Why don't you start out explaining it, and we can get into our sample.
Yeah, Lungtoucher, who I was dimly familiar with. For those who don't know, the black metal guy is the guy who handles most of the, ironically, being the black metal hermit, he's the one that handles most of the social interaction for the show. So you're the guy that spoke to one of the dudes from Lungtoucher. But Lungtoucher is a band who I'm kind of dimly familiar with as, popular on Instagram, kind of black metal. But I'd never heard it before. And just looking it up on Metal Archives, it says, post-black metal, and of course, immediately I'm rolling my eyes, oh, fuck, here we go again. But I would say the execution is pretty different from what you would expect. I would say this Lungtoucher, compared to a lot of the post-black contemporaries, is a lot more black metal than most of them. Obviously, every post-black band it kind of revolves around finding the commonalities between black metal and whatever other genre. Sometimes it's emo, sometimes it's post-rock, sometimes it's shoegaze. And I would say for Lungtoucher, the and genre, the plus sign genre, is probably shoegaze. But I think it's more about applying shoegaze technique to what are pretty straightforward black metal songs in a lot of ways. I think if you strip away some of the excess delay and reverb and gauziness, you have what are just very solid kind of DSBM songs at their core.
The kind of more sort of ironically major key DSBM?
A little bit. There's some of that. Obviously, a lot of the melodic ideas are going to be cut from, say, the Life Lover mold. But there's also... You don't want to ignore the fact that there's a real meaningful thread of pagan black metal in there. From guys who clearly really listen to it. This is not post-black metal from people outside the scene. This is post-black metal by people who are black metal guys, inherently, I would say.
Yeah, all the imagery, and also you'll hear a very raw sound quality are all very black metal. It's like it's sort of like let's do post-black metal as black metal, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah, I would say that,
so
and
why don't
also,
we get into...
well, yeah, I was just also going to say, in addition, it's also pretty fast for the most part, which makes me think of like fast DSBM. Like on one of the Terminus Prime bonus episodes, we covered Nocturne, and there were moments that kind of reminded me of Nocturne or Sturbend on this. The kind of post-black stuff and DSBM tends to sync up a lot of the time, but I think these are guys who really appreciate that side of the scene for what it is. It's all a matter of degrees, and I think the way they kind of arrange the different influences is very promising, and I'd like to hear a full length from these dudes.
Yeah, there's definitely an idea here. So, maybe get into your sample?
Sure. So, Lungtoucher, York is Lost. Again, this is going to be a good example of the kind of thing I'm talking about where, alright, so we're finding the points of melodic commonality between black metal and shoegaze, but then, what if, unlike the other post-black bands, what if we turn those into real riffs, instead of just like, oh, we're just kind of like hanging out, shimmering in this sort of like minor major key, liminal space. Mm-hmm. Let's do actual riffs with these melodic ideas. So let's listen to the first couple minutes of that. Yeah, so even listening to that again, I would say that... is that even post-black? Apart from that final riff there, that could just be like a total self-hatred song. Obviously a little bit less depressive, a little bit more kind of epic and pagan, but yeah, those are constituent black metal parts. That's not really outside of the core genre.
That's you know that side of it better than me. Yeah, so that kind of more delicate chording starts to happen naturally in DSBM. In some ways, many ways before the post-black people kind of make it redundant, right? But yeah, no, that was really good. I liked that it has a thing that struck me on the back end of it was the keys. You got keys coming in, kind of like horns. Listeners could probably hear not only a raw quality to the guitar, but to the synths, right? And it's kind of a strange example of like what gauzy, quote unquote, gauzy, reverby post-black sound would sound like if it were really raw, right? And it's like it has the simplicity of a good idea. It's like, oh, nobody's done that before. Similarly, the sort of the sweep and momentum to it, that was 5 riffs or something. It was a lot happened there, right? And there were some, and I think there were some small but significant tonal shifts between some of the riffs, you know.
I would say that Lungtoucher's advantage compared to a lot of other people in the same niche is their ability to take these sort of melodic ideas we associate with post-black or black gaze, or, you know, whatever form you want to call it, and turn them into riffs in the heavy metal sense. You know, to make them propulsive and make them driving and make them have the impact and the alacrity that we want from extreme metal.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think he does that well there. They've all got, you know, I always complain about things being, especially post-black goes into this a lot. I always complain about things getting sort of formless and kind of diffuse and just lacking a clear outline or direction. And that did not have that at all, right? Those are, you can follow line under the gauze, you can follow lines, there's a movement to it, there's a momentum. So that's all cool. I was thinking also though, like, I don't know if I hear like too much pagan black metal proper here. What I hear is pagan black metal that's already cut with post-black. That is classic Winterfilleth.
That's interesting.
Like, I think in some ways this is, you know how we've talked about there are like, you know how Panzerwar is kind of like the underground black metal reinterpretation of the classic second wave sound, right?
Yeah.
Where the second wave has this kind of big budget, relatively speaking, but, you know, Grieg Holland, full spectrum sound, you know, proficient musicianship, huge scope, right? And then Panzerwar sort of distills it down to raw one-man project punk ethos, let's do this kind of thing. This is kind of like, obviously Winterfilleth's been very influential on like modern pagan black metal bands, on lots of more kind of hi-fi post-black bands that I don't think either of us have a lot of time for. But I think this is kind of like the underground black metal, and like this is Winterfilleth's influence filtering into the underground.
I could see that. You know, it's a little different for me as a guy who was like playing that kind of black metal before Winterfilleth was a big deal. Like I remember when Winterfilleth kind of got big with the Threnody of Triumph, and I showed it to some friends, and it's like, hey, check it out. Our old band got big. You know, like guys.
I mean, they were the ones who got big.
Oh no, I wasn't. It wasn't like, oh fuck, it should have been us. Why aren't they saying we're an influence? But no, just that there were guys that were doing this, like, okay, let's do like polished melodic black metal with a little bit of old Melodeath and a little bit of metalcore, you know, really sand off the edges kind of stuff. And I mean, that's how I would describe
those
my
are
band,
the parts that those are the parts that matter to you about Winterfilleth. Yeah, to me it's the sort of like, I've described them, the parts I don't. I feel like fine about Winterfilleth, and I like their new album a lot. I listened to that one a lot. But
we like
I
the
think
opposite parts of Winterfilleth.
Yeah, I think I've criticized it as sounding like the edges are sanded off in the tonality, but often what I'm referring to are those kind of like big but kind of neutral sounding lush Druid chords. Like they take Druid chords but almost take a lot of the folkiness out of them and give this sort of dent, this kind of, you know, many strings in the chord, but kind of big lush sounding thing. It can have this lots of major key qualities. You know, when that hits, it really does hit. You know, we always talk about how killer the Svart Raven is, right? Or the Glorious Plain. I can remember the names of those songs, right? But like, this is, I feel like those kinds of ideas about tonality, which aren't, you know, I don't necessarily, it's, when it's executed well, it works. Those kinds of ideas about tonality sweeping back into the underground BM. It's kind of like Winterfilleth is maybe now informing ideas of what English black metal sounds like, which I think a few years ago was not the case.
Well, I mean, God knows England has struggled to develop its own black metal idea. I mean, there's been lots of cool black metal bands from England, but they have just never congealed into a regional style. In kind of a weird way, because there's all kinds of prominent British black metal bands or black death bands, but there's just never been really a single focal point to center on, and maybe Winterfilleth is that.
Well, it could be. I think if the influence filters into the underground more. I mean, yeah, the thing is, like, there used to not be a very strong British scenes, but now there are. But they're just all different from each other, right? There are like, you know, there's like the bands, there's Legion Blotan, right? The imagery of this, Lungtoucher's imagery is like Legion Blotan imagery plus raw post-black, right? But there's the bands around like Thy Dying Light is a pretty solid cult black metal circle, right? And that like intersects with who's that awesome band we reviewed at the beginning of the show?
Axis of Light?
No, well, Axis of Light is good, but a different scene. But I was thinking more the Nautical Cradle of Filth.
Fucking
yeah,
Old
one
Corpse
of us
Road.
Old Corpse Road, yeah, who we still need to interview. But yeah, so that's one constellation, kind of. There are strong underground scenes in the UK now, but there still is not a consistent sound. And so if the Winterfilleth thing, which does succeed at sort of sounding English, filters back into the underground through ways like this, I could see that being like a path forward, for sure.
All right.
So, all right, I guess as far as the Winterfilleth things here, I mean, maybe my sample will maybe clear that up more. I think it was not as clear on your sample, and I hear what you mean by the DSBM. But so, this is the beginning of the Heathen's Approach.
Yeah, that one's a lot more post. Like you can hear the pelican written all over that one.
Oh, interesting. Pelican, man.
Pelican fucking
were
rules,
definitely
so.
one of the first.
Yeah.
I like the first Pelican. I like the Australasia EP. That is legendary to me.
You see, my one is the second one. The Fire in Our Throats Will Beckon the Thaw. That is a fucking killer record.
Sure. Hipster.
How the fuck is that hipster? It's not City of Echoes. Jesus.
No. Pelican are by definition like they were classic hipster metal. Like even on the first EP, like I don't even think Pelican would be upset by that label. They'd just be like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, we liked noise rock, and we decided we liked Chugs. You know what it is? I just never forgave them for stopping playing Chugs.
And that was City of Echoes. That was the third one where they
Oh,
just
were there
became
Chugs on the
indie
Fire
rock.
in Our Throats?
Yeah, no, the Fire in Our Throats is heavy.
Maybe I need to go back and listen to that one. I feel like, yeah, that was.
No, that's a good record. I mean, you know how I am with post metal. It still has to be fucking heavy and cool, and I will give a full-throated endorsement to that record.
You know, I'm actually glad to hear that because I'd like to hear more by that band that I like. Because the first, I mean, yeah, someday I think I need to make a Terminus playlist of like good early 2000s low and slow, sort of like basically good hipster metal, right before the whole like fake black metal thing happened.
Yeah,
right?
no, but if you like ISIS, like Panopticon, you'll like the Fire in Our Throats.
Well, see, it took me a while on Panopticon. Panopticon sounds like a Tool record, but I was finally brought around on it because I realized, oh, I can like this as a Tool record.
I was about to say, but Tool's good. What's wrong?
No, I know. Okay, you know, look, late high school, early college was, a period of
a difficult
taking
time.
A variety of taking very strongly defined postures on things that we didn't necessarily know all about yet. Right.
All right.
So anyway, back to Lungtoucher. So yeah, it's very post, but it's got that kind of like, lilting, major key, sentimental vibe that you do get in Winterfilleth, right? As far as other stuff that isn't overtly post. I think that sample has some of the strengths and weaknesses, or basically, like, it has some of the strengths of this project combined with some of the perils of the style.
Yeah.
So, like, that does have, unlike a ton of post stuff, which is just about, as you said in the notes, smartly, is just about sitting on chords or notes. This does have these kinds of dynamic melody to it. So it's got this, the melody itself is kind of gridded, right? Da 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 da, but the way it develops over the first minute or so is pretty cool. He keeps shifting around its position. He takes little parts of it and moves it in different spots. There's a nice although the melody itself has this great quality, the way it moves doesn't. It feels very organic and melodic, and it's a sort of more than the sum of its parts effect. And the chording behind it is really nice. And you get that sort of continued momentum through it. Also, I really like the keys there. The keys give it all this kind of nautical. Maybe I'm just this kind of nautical tone.
I like the keys on Lungtoucher's side. They're subtle but well applied. They're mostly just doing harmonies, like basic octave harmonies, but the tones are chosen very well. They're like a little bit above kind of Casio dungeon synth tones, but they still have the rawness there. I think the sound selection is very strong on them.
They're sort of the low-budget version of what Killed was doing.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think of a parallels outside the UK as far as like pagan black metal that this does sound like. Well, mood-wise, it does sound like the more sort of romantic moments of the Dutch bands, and that kind of yearning, nostalgic possibly oceanic quality that we heard in the latest Killed. And I think also, I would guess this guy likes Odal, the German band, with this kind of wild and passionate melody that is often very divorced from traditional BM ideas of what a riff is.
I'm going to throw it out there. I'm going to throw it out there. I bet these guys are big fans of Kana. You remember them?
Oh, really? Oh, you're not joking? You're serious?
Yeah, why not?
Oh, I think Kana became a meme, but back in the day, I think that might have more to do with the antics of the frontman, or the sole member.
Are we talking about the same Kana?
Is it the British black metal band?
Yeah, the British kind of like post-blacky band. Yeah.
Yeah, he got all Decibel magazine, but like.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
No, I barely knew the music back in the day. So, but yeah, how does this sound like Kana?
Oh, you see, I'm like pulling him up on Metal Archives, and it's like, oh wow, he did way more shit than I thought. No, I'm thinking about like old Kana, like through like Temporary Antenna, where it was like super early post-black, like back in the day when the only way you could make post-black is if you actually knew about post-rock and shoegaze and shit. You couldn't just copy other post-black bands,
Yeah. And, this is like Velvet Cocoon era.
Yeah. I interacted with the guy a little bit online, and he was a cool guy. I mean, as far as I knew, he seemed chill. He seemed to know a lot about black metal as well as about these other genres. But I guess what I'm getting at in terms of the comparison is the sort of... This doesn't feel like the sort of post-black metal in a box that you get from a lot of bands. Like we always talk about, if you want to do one of these kind of genre blend things, you have to go back to the origins of all the genres. And I feel like the guys in Lungtoucher know more about post-rock proper and shoegaze proper than a lot of the bands nowadays.
And possibly were around there for this first generation of post-black stuff you're talking about, which... Honestly, because I wasn't super tuned into BM at that time yet, I mostly know by it was already like Velvet Cocoon was already kind of beginning to be in the rearview mirror by the time I started.
Yeah. No, Kana, I was never a huge Kana fan. I kind of appreciated what he was doing in the abstract, but it just, wasn't my thing. I like blast beats and angry riffs. But he definitely had a sense of how to make polished black metal meets post-rock and indie rock stuff. And I feel like these guys are in a similar vein of really knowing the constituent parts of the style and knowing how to assemble them into a meaningful whole. I guess the only thing I would say for Lungtoucher is my favorite parts are definitely the most traditionally aggressive in terms of black metal, and that's not just coming from a metalhead thing. Like when we were talking about Sertraline, it was like I really like the jazzy clean parts, but I feel like for these guys, their strength really does lie in the stuff that hews the closest to traditional black metal. And I think if they really concentrate on how do we incorporate these outside of metal ideas, like melodic and rhythmic ideas, and how do we fold that into a black metal structure, that would be really strong, and I would like to hear a record of all that.
No, I think you're right about that. I think, yeah, no, for sure. I think the original concept is the fact that it's got this black metal grounding, right? That sort of it's. Even apart from the fact that we like aggressive black metal, it is the distinct fact. It makes what they're doing distinctive, and it also helps keep them grounded in sort of just in the concrete and the tangible. Yeah. I feel like that sample, the Heathens approach, in the last 30 seconds, it sort of goes a little too far out into sort of hazy feely land. And
I
you can hear fragments of the original melody, but it kind of, because it's kind of dispersed in all these clouds of post, kind of loses some of the punch it had at the beginning. But yeah, I think I think I agree with you about this completely. Like, their strength is that this is a post-black band by people who actually like black metal and actually like post things, right?
All right. So, that was the second side of the split, and we should probably touch on the first side. I'm not a big fan of Panzerwar's side.
Yeah, it seems. I think we get, and I think the idea is interesting and sort of shows a it shows a good willingness to sort of try new stuff and try to like step outside of, I don't know, like good. Like, basically, the gesture is, it seems to be like he's tried to bend his sound more towards Lungtoucher, right? He's changed the production, he's changed some of the note, the note and chording quality. Granted, this guy has been ridiculously prolific, so it's possible there's something in the Panzerwar back catalog that sounds more like this. But, like, this stuff seems like it's been fitted for this record in a way that shows, like, flexibility and, like, a kind of camaraderie, right? It's like, we're making this thing together, let's try to integrate it. That's cool. Doesn't really work.
Yeah, it's very strange, Panzerwar's side, because, obviously I'm not super familiar. We covered the Warlord EP last year, and that was from my perspective, a capable, if unexceptional, sort of second wave style black metal record. This is kind of, it feels like Panzerwar is trying to lean into Lungtoucher's style a little bit, but it feels like he's not really sure what that's composed of. So what you get is kind of awkward. You've got this very rough-hewn fusion of old school second wave worship, which is kind of what Panzerwar specializes in, alongside very kind of modern black metal ideas, and it doesn't gel well. It feels like the songs don't. Well, they're kind of not songy in a lot of ways. They kind of start and they iterate through a few riffs and they just kind of stop. It feels very confused to me.
I think in a lot of spots it sounds kind of just like Panzerwar type stuff, but with lower intensity, right? Less of those kinds of cutting trem riffs, more kind of chording, and just a lot more reverb, right? Just different kind of production, like the sort of glistening sound. Whatever. It's a split, right? You experiment, you try things out. No big deal. But I think we felt that Across the Northern Deep was one that didn't really land for either of us, we'll say. So let's just do a short sample of that, and I think you guys will get the picture.
Yeah, you can hear him really trying to lean into the collaboration on that last riff there, but it just it sounds uncomfortable for him, you know?
Yeah, you're saying in terms of focusing more on these sort of textured chords, drawing them long chords, drawing them out more.
Yeah, it doesn't sound natural for him. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with the style, but it's like you can hear the really abrupt juncture between the more second wave stuff and those more kind of post-black ideas.
That's actually a good point. The melodic idea is almost exactly the same, which is descend a semitone, right? But like there is that kind of hiccup between them. That's true. But yeah, it's I would say that is just kind of like, it's a more kind of expansive, atmospheric version of a thing that was common in the 2000s, which is abuse of the dark funeral chords.
Yeah, no, I think there's an admirable effort being made here, but it doesn't play to his strengths. You know, I mean, Panzerwar's strengths are playing very kind of resolute, traditional, but sort of like minimal auteur versions of second wave stuff, and I mean, I'm sure he really likes Lungtoucher and wanted to make a meaningful contribution, and I respect that, but it just doesn't seem to land for his style.
I feel like a defining part of his sound is that it's spiky. Like, the tones are all spiky. The music is very fast, usually. And when it's slow, it has this kind of crisp and percussive quality. If you're deliberately trying to soften things and make things more textural, it might kind of just be interfering with the noise in the fundamental signal of the project.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it's... I mean, none of it's bad. It just feels... Like I said, it feels not at comfort with itself. It feels like a guy who is stretching beyond his means, but in kind of a, like, excessive way. Like, it's a little unnatural and stiff feeling. And, overall, I don't think it's the ideal way to hear Panzerwar.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, you couldn't try to think of a good analogy for this, but, I mean, you wouldn't ask Iljarn to play a dance number, right?
Hey, it's Kari from Sepulchre Curse.
And I'm Jakob.
You're listening to Terminus.
All right, we are back with, yes, more raw pagan black metal. This time it is a band from Spain, Turment Nocturne, with the record Senza Misericordia. This is specifically Catalan separatist, I imagine. I mean, Catalan black metal, so it's maybe I shouldn't even say Spanish, but it is in the territorial boundaries of Spain. And it came out. As I said up front, it's out on Narbontage, who I guess I'm able to follow through Bandcamp because they post it there, but they are a very hard copy only label. And it's also in the Spanish language distro Negra Neat, or maybe Catalan language distro. I don't know. So this is I just clicked on it because it looked cool. I don't know. And it was cool. So this is very, very, very minimalistic black metal. And it is there were a few things that struck me about it in particular. I think the overall energy of it reminded me of a mutual favorite band of mine and the death metal guy, which is Spite Extreme Wing. Has a powerfully solar and southern sound, and similar kind of ear in the melodies, I think. Similar to the early Spite Extremewing stuff, like the 2000 demo. Although this is even simpler than that, or is much simpler than that.
Yeah, this is rigorously minimal. Actually, you know what this really reminds me of more than anything? Something we covered on the show. The Sardonic Witchery record we covered last year.
I don't really hear that at all. That's interesting.
Oh, no, more in the idea that it is resolutely minimal takes on conventional black metal forms. And the unique property is within the rigorous minimalism, you know?
Oh, sure. Understood that. Yes, yeah. The game is how can you do these songs in this minimalistic way? Sure, that makes total sense to me. Yeah, stylistically, for listeners who don't know, Sardonic Witchery is closer to, like, sort of Dark Throne-y stuff. That's a very general way of putting it, because he's got all kinds of riffs thrown in there. But this band has an extremely uniform melodic sensibility, too. I think we basically agree that the center of gravity on this EP is clearly the first track, right?
Yeah, I think so. This is very weird to talk about, because would it be unfair to say that there are, like, 7 riffs across this EP?
That might be an exaggeration.
Yeah, it's, which is also something that was very Sardonic Witchery, because Sardonic Witchery would do that thing where it's like, here's a 5-minute song, here's your 3 riffs, and they're very good riffs, and they were so good, I was like, why not just play them 16 times? You know?
Yeah. So the arrangements here are a little, and that was also weird, because what you heard would be sort of conventions of, like, black and rolly Dark Throne / Finnish stuff being stretched out to weird times. Like, song structures that you could trace back to Venom being weirdly dilated. I feel like the writing here is closer to, I mean, the other thing this is going to remind people of is just the whole family of, like, very minimal takes on the Seigneur Voland sound. It may be a little bit like a few parts of the Leshy record we reviewed the other week. But, like, very just sort of distilled down to basics, glorious melodic chorded riffs. We got a few other parallels for it. Really, this is the song that we think matters most. I think this is the song that has the most potential. I love it. Let's just listen to Rius de Sang. The whole, basically, we'll go a minute in, and then we'll listen to the rest of the track.
Yeah, it's, admittedly, this is a very good song. Yeah, so that's like 3 rigorous French black metal riffs. And I mean, I guess if there's something to say, it's that he can do a, 4-minute song with 3 riffs and keep my attention, which is fairly remarkable in and of itself these days.
Yeah. So, I think I've got some other ideas on where the sort of the riff. I think the basic riff form might be coming from the French, and like who were the first people to do those kinds of melodic, this sort of, those sliding textured, fit chords that we always talk about as the Franco-Finnish style, right? Mm-hmm. And to do them in a very simple way. But I feel like the feeling in them is different. I feel like this feels much, although there's a kind of storming quality to all these riffs, it feels much brighter. And it feels like the production has this kind of glaring quality to it. And the intervals, they lack the passing tones. That lacks like the half steps and stuff that you would get in the French stuff that makes it either sound more sinister and satanic or more kind of romantic and flowery.
Yeah, this is that kind of riffing distilled to its barest intervals.
Yeah, you strip it down so far it becomes something else. And like, in terms of other bands that do that, well, they're actually other Iberian bands. So, Owl's Blood from the Basque country, who are like absolute masters of that. I listened again to that record the other night. It blew me away. Just every time I love it. And also a band that came out sort of around the same time as Owl's Blood and has been kind of forgotten, I think, but was very popular, which is Lluvia, Lluvia, we're from Mexico, but okay, sort of general theme here. All right. And they really drew out their very simple riffs, very long and drawn out, similar kind of more melancholy, but a similar kind of apocalyptic vibe, a similar kind of like, the world is ending right now. It's ending right now. Hell yeah, here it goes. But a similar kind of drawn out legato feeling to the riffs. But what were you gonna say?
Oh, just that, like, I could see. It's interesting because I listen to it and I think about the context of these simple riffs being drawn just to their breaking point. And the first place my mind goes is, like, Forest. But the difference is, at a certain point, Forest isn't about the riffs anymore. This is about the riffs in a different way.
I think that's true. Also,
yeah.
Go.
Oh, no, just this is, like, vigorously concentrated on demonstrating the riff. Like, you listen to Forest and it's like, the riff goes, it's a great riff, but then it falls into the background and it's just part of this atmospheric smear that goes across your brain, Here it's like, no, you're supposed to be listening to this riff every time it plays. Which is...
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of more like... It's more like Transylvanian Hunger in that way,
I think that's a good comparison too. I'm sure this guy likes Forest. This sounds unhinged in a way that's similar to to those bands, right? But Transylvania Hunger for sure, yeah. How so?
Transylvanian Hunger is, in my mind, sort of the beginning. At least insofar as, like, a lot of people can understand it, of the sort of hypnotic black metal effect. Obviously, there was that on Under a Funeral Moon, but it's a very different
and on the early Burzum records. Right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But I think Transylvanian Hunger is the thing that a lot of people seized onto. But the thing about Transylvanian is like I was saying with this, you're supposed to listen to those riffs every time. You're not really supposed to let it fade into the background in the way that even early Burzum you kind of do in a way. This is very interesting music. I don't know. I've gone off and on this demo a lot of times. Yeah. It's like I keep rethinking. It's like sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. But I think that the fact that it's such a question in my mind means that it's worth listening to, you know?
I think so, yeah. I mean, Under a Funeral, or sorry, Transylvanian Hunger also does a good job of sort of sustaining peak intensity the whole time and creating variation within that, right?
Yeah.
And so this has that for sure, but I wanted to say something about the riffs. I agree what you say about the riffs. So that's one reason I tie this to bands like Spite Extremewing or whatever that have this kind of radiant light quality, this sort of like searing clarity and intensity. Like, look at the here is the riff, contemplate the riffs. And what makes this so good in part is timing. Mm-hmm. So you'll notice that, did he change the blast beat once during? No, I think he may on the last riff, the more descending one, he may change it to a triple time. But for most of the rest of it is a uniform blast, and all of the riff shape has so much to do with subtle timing and right hand stuff. So like he's if you take the bass riff like da 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 da, da 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 da, you can think of there are like 10 trillion versions of that riff that suck, right?
Yeah.
You could play it in a stiff kind of click track, cookie cutter melodic Finnish French black metal style, and it would suck. However, it does latch on to an black metal phrase, right? Da 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 da. That obviously also is just essential melodically to tons of BM stuff, right? So it's just like it's a stock idea that could be used to terrible effect. But he's playing it with so much. He's like pulsing it in the picking, and every time the riff loops, the timing on it is slightly different. Not just like groove or swing, but as in like, I think you could literally chart it out like, oh, it's a 16th note longer this time, or like each time he returns to it, the different chords in it are a slightly different length. And as it cycles through the repetitions, it morphs. And it's possible, maybe in his head, he knows how long he's able to. Maybe he has some fixed version of it now, but it sounds like it had to have started from improvising.
Yeah, well, I think it's a guy. I think it's coming from a guy who's a little bit more in touch with the act of playing guitar, where
yes.
For instance, certain riffs, like when I play them on guitar, just doing like tremolo black metal riffs, I don't even know if you could hear it on recording, but it's like you're emphasizing the half note or the quarter note a little bit more, along with the drums. These little kind of just like fluctuations in the picking hand that, it's like I'm going a little more driving here, I'm going a little bit more open here, and I think he incorporates that very fully into the texture of this music.
Yeah, that's something I was talking about with Spellbearer in the Sylvan Throne interview, about doing that. Yeah, so he's got that control on the right hand and that sort of pulse and flow to it. And at the same time, because he's messing with the timing he has this fixed grid on the drums, and he's messing with the timing over it in this fluid way, it changes the shape of the riff. So the riff is no longer, it's not just this rigid stock riff, and it's not even just this kind of fixed pattern that keeps repeating. It is there's something kind of elusive to it where like you have to be listening to it the whole time.
Yeah.
You could not drag and drop it. You'd be missing the whole idea. And yeah, and I think it's very physical playing. I mean, I imagine him standing up like swaying as he plays that, right?
Yeah, there's
Like,
an internal organic rhythm against the mechanized drum machine.
and I think he may have, you could imagine that he subtracted 3 or 4 riffs from this song, right? It's as if he found just the riffs he could play like from his deepest spirit. Just
Yeah,
like
I can see that. Yeah,
like he feels these, and there's almost a singing quality to it. It's like it's yeah. There's a lot more. Although this is very simple, there's a lot more true musicality in this than in a lot of BM.
all right. I like the demo. You've convinced me.
Phew. My work is done. Yeah, as for the rest of it, we don't think it's as good, right? The middle track is kind of just a throwaway stompy black metal song, and the last track is solid, kind of in between the two, but like the first one, damn.
This is a little one gash, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right, welcome back to this final segment of Terminus Raw Heathen Black Metal Podcast, featuring Doppelaxt, the stomping sons of the Pennsylvania black metal scene, with their debut EP, demo, whatever, short release called Kill the Opposition. As you said up front, there's an independent Bandcamp release of this, which is highly accessible at the generous price of, I think it's pay what you want or very inexpensive. So you should do
$1.
that. But there you go. It's worth more than that. And you should also get the tape from Signal Rex if you would like. It's got a battle axe on it. A Doppelaxt is just a big double-headed axe. This is pretty cool. This is when the person who sent this to me, this was submission from a listener. When the person sent it to me, I was just like, well, dude, like I don't know what I can. This is just so up my alley. I don't need to write the review. Like, he was like, I know, it felt like cheating. It
kind of is.
Yeah, so the simple way of putting it, although there's more going on here, is that it's kind of, the concept seems to be very attentive listening to early Graveland and Temple of Full Moon stuff via hardcore and maybe even more oi than was already kind of submerged in those Polish bands. And I think it comes from like a broader listening to Temple of Full Moon, which I honestly haven't done. I've been so obsessed with Graveland over the years. It's been like my sort of, obviously it's almost it's almost a meme for me on this show, right? But like I don't know those other bands well at all. And this totally makes me want to go back and check out more of them in the way that like a really solid underground band with a concept does. It's like, oh, these dudes have done their homework. Now they're sending me on a quest, right? But like, there's definitely more going on here than just like smart worship project, right? There's a pretty original, there's a pretty distinctive impulse that's coming together here, and I think has a lot of potential. So, what did you make of it?
I liked this way more than I expected to. Just based on the way you described it, which is, not incorrect, which is sort of like bashing Graveland. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll probably like that to a degree, and I won't listen to it again, but this I will listen to again. This is very good. It's hard to tell what the center of this project is going to be, because it feels like, so this is a 3-song demo, and I feel like each of the songs provides a theoretical path forward. And sort of a theoretical center for this project. as well as, a set of ideas they could draw from at their leisure on a full length or something like that. No, this was a lot more kind of developed and mature than I thought it would be. Like, just based on your description and based on the people that I know are involved, whatever, I was expecting something a little bit more like Fawnbearer or something like that, which is, obviously, there's nothing wrong with that, because, as you showed me, Fawnbearer is extremely cool and dope. So, but... no, I think
deliberately something deliberately primitive in a kind of like raw black metal way, right?
Oh yeah.
This is
severe concentrated retardation,
yeah, and this is more than yes, this is more than that. This is exuberant, free flowing retardation.
Yes. This is oddly sophisticated.
It also, you could imagine somebody doing a sound like this, you could imagine somebody making this sound pretty cryptic, possibly to an obnoxious degree, right? But I think it would be totally fair game to record this in an extremely raw way. Just basically put a mic in the room and leave it. But this seems to have... It's a raw production. It's very organic sounding, but it's got a punchy, powerful upfront production, and the performance, the force of the performance carries through and is boosted by that.
It's so funny just talking about raw production.
Similarly... Go.
Oh, just, I've been going back to a lot of Black Legion stuff lately, where... I haven't listened to Vlad Tepes in God knows how many years, and then I listened to, like, March to the Black Holocaust and stuff, and I was like, is this bad production? Everyone said this was, like, terrible production, but this is fucking fine to me. I don't know.
Vlad Tepes, well, yeah, that's just proves that, we've been in it too long. But, But Vlad Tepes is the most normal sounding LLN band. They're the one, yeah, that's...
Yeah, well, but even, Belcatre was like, oh yeah, this is fine, whatever.
Nice.
Brenner and Frezzacree was a little bit, okay, that's a little bit much, but...
You'd be proud of me. I was enjoying some Mutilation the other day.
Oh, there you go.
I was in
my boy's growing up.
I listened to Mutilation back in the day, but I was just in a really shit mood, and I thought, well, there's nothing for this but Ravens at My Funeral.
Oh yeah, and a fucking incredible album all the way through. But Doppelaxt, American, not French.
American.
And what have you?
Okay.
What have you got for a sample here?
All right, thanks for steering me, death metal guy. We're getting towards the end of a late night recording session. So for me, for my sample, I'm just going with the. I think the track you sampled from Rune's Call for War is the most unique and probably strongest single track on here. But I'm just gonna. I'm going to go for it and sample the part that sounds like Graveland. So this is, they start the record off with continuing the endless fight, just so that you know it is eternal and has already been going on. And you get some relatively, the beginning of the song is interesting. We'll get some, it comes in a sort of like, the melodic ideas are relatively standard, but you get this... You could kind of expect it to Graveland, but really they're doing the Hordane's Land or Children of the Grave kind of loping, classic black metal 6/8 rhythm, but with these kinds of pagan black metal power chord riffs over it. And then it just lights into a breakdown, and we'll go from there.
All right. Yeah, that's definitely the part you would choose.
Yeah. Yeah, that I mean, that's generally what I like about music. The genre known as music.
Well, it's also it's unique because they're actually doing the Graveland beat.
You knew, buddy. Yes.
Yeah, I know. We're you and me. You know, we're docking right now emotionally.
Oh gosh, that's beautiful. Yeah. So you could hear the lead up. It's kind of just loping, kind of power chord thing, and then, I mean, you get when that breaks in. It's actually the cacophonous beat, and the drummer actually does. The thing that makes it so good is that it's jammy.
Yeah.
You can tell that the drums change underneath in ways that are responsive to the melodies and very organic in a similar, I mean, maybe a somewhat more technically accomplished, but a very similar way to the sort of shifting drum ideas on Thousand Swords or Following the Voice of Blood.
Mm-hmm. No, it's there is a real investment to the core of Graveland there, which is, it's interesting. This is the song that is the obvious like Graveland song on this demo, and that actually struck me when I heard it. It's like, oh, he's actually doing the fucking Capricornus beat. You know, because there's plenty of bands that sound like Graveland, but very few are going to listen enough and get drunk enough to do that beat properly. You know, like, it is distinct. And yeah, the jammy quality at the end there is very important to it.
And you could it's possible to phone that beat in, right? You could tap it, basically. You could do it without the just insistent battering on the snare and all the sort of clashing cymbals that sound like people dancing around a fire on the steps, right? But and the guitar gets it too. So like that's very simple elemental riffs, but it's got the droning quality, and it's the call and response between the riffs that makes the whole melodic idea.
Well, yeah, it's the eighth note on the ride cymbal against everything else. That is the guiding voice. You know, everything else is kind of like bumping into each other and kind of like pushing for space, and it's that ride cymbal chirping away that guides the whole thing. In the same way that like in the same way that like a tambourine would around the maypole, you know?
I get that. Yeah, that's something I have not noticed before. I'll listen for that. So yeah, you get that. Yeah, it depends on this 3 against 4 feel, so that really marks the 4, and then everything else pulls and pushes around it.
Oh yeah. No, Graveland stuff rhythmically is super interesting. And plus, obviously the riff is calling to that, like, Eastern European meets Celtic thing, like, hovering around these sort of, like, blues scales. It's a very interesting way to do black metal, and I think that a lot of the bands that attempt to clone Graveland to some degree miss out on that part of it. The sort of weird Celtic scales that are really predominant on like the first 3 records by that band.
Well, maybe when they shift more to the pagan sound, you would get it more from Carpathian Wolves onward.
Okay.
But there are a lot of Graveland records, so it's hard to keep track of.
I'm thinking of Following the Voice and like Carpathian Wolves, mostly.
Yeah, so Carpathian Wolves, and then you have that, and then you have Thousand Swords, then you have Following the Voice. This does sound like that trio, which you could say is like classic mid-era sort of raw Graveland. It sounds the most like Thousand Swords, which I still think is, if I had to pick the best one. I'm particularly like, there's a track on there called like The Dark Battlefield, which is just one of my favorite BM songs of all time. And you can hear, the motions of like the dance-like movements of hand-to-hand combat with swords, kind of just really built into the way. The riffs have a similar kind of bouncing off each other quality of here, and it really drones. So, deep knowledge of Graveland, understanding of what makes it work, ability to bust that out at the end of the song in a really cool way. The other just overall thought I had about the band that I got listening to that sample again, and this will segue into your thing, is like, you couldn't really identify any one thing as the big riff or like the big catchy part, but every single person in the band is just firing on 110 at everything they're doing. The vocals are killer too, and that's something that when you download the album, you'll hear the vocals at the beginning, how hard it comes in.
Oh, definitely. So, my sample's off the second track, which you were saying was perhaps the most unique and kind of defining one. My argument is that it's the third track, My Journey Toward Idealism. That is the song. That is 100%. By the way, we haven't mentioned it, but this is outlaw rock. 100%.
Interesting. I've wondered how well, like, really Slavic sounding... Like, the Graveland stuff does sound, like, pretty damn Slavic. I've wondered how well it would fit into that, but based on the last two songs and just the general attitude, I think I see what you mean.
Yeah. My Journey Toward Idealism is the standout song on this demo for me. That is so fucking good. It is an outstanding sort of American, like deeply American take on late Bathory, which I think is something that outlaw rock probably needs. But my sample is off the second track, Rune's Call for War, which is just a demonstration really of how good these guys are at various styles of black metal riffing, and how good they are, again, at joining them to each other. So why did they only play that final riff a couple times? You're supposed to play that like 8 times, right?
Well, that's your favorite kind of riff.
Oh yeah, it's the big Seigneur Volan riff. Yes, I would like to hear that more. Thank you. No, but so that sample in particular is just a collection of really cool moments. So you've got this, but I guess the important thing is, okay, so you've got that kind of medieval peasant melody they do a couple variations on. But the thing is, they play it. The opening couple riffs of that before the lead kicks in.
Okay.
So it's like kind of a conventional like medieval peasant kind of French riff, but they play it way too fast. You know, they're playing it like 30 BPM, or excuse me, 30 skeletons per second faster than they're supposed to.
Oh, I see what you meant. The
Yeah, that one.
All right, so you're saying that they're playing it much faster than you'd expect?
Yeah, no, I think you would hear a riff like that, but you would hear it in that sort of like folk drone mid-pace style, but then they just amp it up, you know, they're kicking it out. They're kicking out the jams, motherfucker, and just like driving it forward in a way that you wouldn't ordinarily expect. You know, which gives it a very different kind of character. Then you've got that cool kind of keening Ukrainian like Senko riff there, and then big Seigneur Volan finisher. It's everything we like in black metal.
And don't forget the bashing power chords over 1-2 decca beats. Right?
Oh, of course.
Yes. Yeah, dude. I hear what you mean about that first riff. It's like, even on the parts that are, I guess that you could also call that a Gravelandy part, but I guess, yeah, even on those Gravelandy parts, they're pushing the tempo. Yeah, that makes sense to me totally. And it's funny, when you said in the notes that kind of droning lead riff sounded like a Ukrainian thing, and now that I think about it, I hear what you mean, because Senko occasionally does those kinds of like, you know, single string runs or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing is that tonally, it's like a nonsense riff. Like it sort of fits with the general key of the rest of it, but it's it almost has a death metal random interval quality, like, because it doesn't really sound like a folk melody. And even though it's being played in this folky, drony voicing. And I think that's the catchiest riff on the record.
You see, I wouldn't even say that it's not necessarily folky. Because, like, I mean, a lot of Russian folk music seems to hover around those kind of, like, half-step down repetitions. You know, which sounds, you know, to the Western ear like slightly dissonant or slightly sinister, but it seems to be kind of an Eastern European flavor. It's just not one we hear a lot over here.
I know what you're talking about, and it's not that. Okay. But it could fit. I mean, I get what you mean, like, because there is that precedence of dissonance in Eastern European folk, it fits generally. But, like, I just feel like there's such, it's so, like, it chases itself in this kind of crazed way. I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm being rigid. Like it's, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is it has a very abstract quality to it. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, I get that. Definitely.
Like, it's, and maybe also the way it's being played rhythmically changes. Like, because if you took those intervals and said, da 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 da, yeah, I hear that a little more. So it kind of like weird, haunting kind of flute melody or whatever, right? But it has this sing-song quality. It just races around. It after the first time I heard it, I wouldn't expect that to be my favorite riff on the record, but that's what got stuck in my head, and I loved it. And it's got, the crazed blast. The drums on this record are fantastic, and the blasting under that, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right, so what are your words about the Journey Toward Idealism? Because that is your favorite track.
Listen to it.